Hello, my name is Ashtongleckman, and welcome to my closer look at Sir Edward Elgar's Nimrod from the Enigma Variations. So the Enigma Variations were composed between 1898 and 1899. There are 14, I believe, different variations actually within the Enigma Variations. And the interesting thing about it is over 100 years later, there's still so much debate about what the enigma or the mystery actually really is. So there's been dozens and dozens of different attempts to sort of figure it out, but it still is unsolved. And I think it's the mystery surrounding the piece that makes it so incredibly intriguing. But there's so many beautiful, beautiful variations. But this one in specific, the Adagio variation from the piece, or called the Nimrod, it has this beautiful, beautiful angelic quality to it. And we're going to be taking a look at the harmony and then my little arrangement that I've done for it here. So, of course, there's been multiple different takes on it, and I love to just sort of go through YouTube and find different arrangements of it and stuff like that. There's a beautiful, I think, choral arrangement from this British choir group called Voces 8. There's also a beautiful, beautiful arrangement in the film Dunkirk, and that was arranged by Benjamin Wallfish, and it's a beautiful use of it because it's sort of used to describe the British spirit.
Home.
So it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of music, and so let's go ahead and take a look at my arrangement that I did here. Alrighty, so there's the arrangement. So as you can see, I sort of went for a mixture of the Ben Wallfish, the original, and the Vultus 8 arrangement. So for example, I took a lot of the whole sort of fluttery effects that Ben included in his arrangement. I sort of combined it with the structure of Elgar's original in terms of having the chords less sort of stretched out like they were in the Dunkirk variation or arrangement. And then in terms of the Vultus 8, I wanted to include a little bit of that choir element that I loved. And so I included this, the Dominus choir, which has this really nice big present sound to it. So let's take a look first thing at the harmony, because whenever I start any sort of string arrangement like this, the first thing I do is pull up the flautando patch and figure out the chords and stuff like that. So here's sort of the harmony. The whole piece is in E flat major. So we have this E flat major chord, A flat major with a third in the bass, major sixth, E flat major with a third in the bass, B sus4, E flat major, C minor, and then we take this and make that the 7 of F, F7, B flat major, then we have this sort of really, really beautiful minor second suspension here, E flat major, and then we put an F over it, D minor, again make this the 7, so now we have G7, and now we're just going to repeat. And now we do this really, really interesting thing. Elgar chooses to go to this sort of F with the third in the bass, F minor, and it has this beautiful quality to it. And then when he goes to the E flat major with the third in the bass, the chords just meld so nicely together. So that goes like this. That's almost like this Lydian thing, and we have this 3 in there as well. And then we're right back where we started, with the dominant. And then we're back to our tonic. So that's sort of how that's laid out in this particular arrangement. So let's talk a little bit about what we have going on with our strings. So once we had that sort of laid down as our bed, then we can sort of add all the different elements on top of it. So in terms of legato, we have a few different things going on. So we have this flautando legato. I believe this is from Albion 5, and that's being doubled with the legato from Spitfire Chamber Strings, Violin 1, I believe. And those are both doubling each other. And then when we get to the third pass, the sort of grand fortissimo pass here, that's when we introduce the Metropolis Arc 2, which is sort of our more aggressive, louder, expressive string. So let's just take a look at what these two sound like together here. These are the Albion 5 and Spitfire Chamber Strings. So you can see it has this just very, very light feel to it. And then when we introduce our Metropolis Arc 2, we get a much more present. And I love the way that the Metropolis Arc 2 strings are quite realistic but quite upfront and sort of dry. And they have that very sort of Benjamin Wallfish sound, that very realistic, semi-noisy, but you know, when you record strings in a studio environment, you do get that natural noise. And I love the way that that library doesn't hesitate to keep that in there and really just be truthful to the sound. So I love that. So what else do we have going on here? So the two main textures that I really enjoyed using were the Soltasto and Solpont, because they both have this very similar tone, but they both have enough different about them to make them both have their own impact on the piece. So Solpont is when the player will actually play near the bridge, and Soltasto is when the player will play on the fingerboard. And Solpont is a little bit more aggressive than Soltasto, but I'll just sort of play Solpont by itself really quick just so you can see the effect that it has. Very sort of rugged, sort of timid. And then our Soltasto is a little bit more grand. It has that similar scratchy tone, but it's a little bit more confident. So that is what we have going on there as well. And when it comes to the beginning of the piece, I sort of started with this sort of big boomer, and that was actually from Metropolis Arc 2. And I love the booms from Metropolis Arc 2. There's a lot of different libraries that have sort of these big sort of subsonic booms. For example, Gravity has some great ones. I know that the Albion stuff have a lot of cool ones as well, the Easter Island hits. But I'm a big fan of the Metropolis Arc 2 ones. For me, they're really big, round, and they have a really, really great quality to them. And that sounds like this just on its own. And that sort of leads us into the piece. And right when that boom hits, we have a little bit of these sort of fluttery textures coming in automatically. In specific, our Pulsing Consort, which is from Albion 5, which is just this really sort of high hanging element that goes over the whole entire arrangement. And then we have this tremolo cello from Spitfire Chamber Strings. And then all of that together sounds like this. So you can see, like, sort of by themselves, they sound like quite open. And then you introduce another one of these high elements. And then you introduce the sort of tremolo. And then you finally have that boomer to sort of bring everything around. And when you add all those different elements on top of each other, it sort of builds and builds and builds until you get that texture that you want. So that's what we have going on there. Let's quickly take a look at what we have going on for our basses. So I think that the basses weren't very present in the Flautando patch at all, so it needed a much more heavy bass presence. And I chose to go with Spitfire Mural, which is now known as the Spitfire Symphonic Strings, but I never upgraded. I still just have Mural Volume 1. And it has a really, really nice round tone to it. I really like using that for the basses. But another great bass to use also that I didn't choose to use on this one, but I do use a whole lot, is the Metropolis Arc 2 bass. But that one is a little bit too upfront and a little bit too aggressive for what I was wanting here, which is a much more light, rounder tone. Combining that with the Flautando. So that's really what we have going on there. And then we just have a couple other textures as well, like this cool butterfly texture from Intimate Strings. I love all those sort of like, it's sort of like using an anamorphic lens. You get that really cool cinematic quality, but you have all these little sort of inconsistencies in there, and these little sort of screw ups, like, you know, crazy lens flares and stuff like that. But it makes it feel a lot more grounded, a lot more sort of interesting and realistic when you have those inconsistencies and those sort of flaws. And I love all these little sort of things in there that sort of adds to the overall texture. And you have a whole lot of that going on in Ben's arrangement. So let's talk a little bit about what we have going on for the choirs. So I'm using Dominus, which is a beautiful sample library from Fluffy Audio, and I was really, really excited when I first played this library and I first took a look at the... So here it is here. So you can see we have both male and female choirs going on at the same time, and I chose to use Christus. For me, it had this really, really nice quality to it, but you can actually formulate any type of words or stuff like that using their amazing word building engine. So that's really what we have going on in terms of that. So let me just play the choir element by itself at the beginning here. So you can see the thing about Dominus is, even though it sounds really great and really realistic, is you do have to do quite a lot of work to make things line up on the actual beat. So for this, you can see if we were to quantize everything, versus this. Well, let me just put it on the tempo. Versus comes in a little late, so you sort of have to do a little bit of work to make things line up. So that's the only thing that I would say needs a little bit of work, perhaps in V2 of Dominus, is just making things a little bit more accessible to people who are quantizing stuff or sort of want to make things simpler just by lining them up on the bar. You need to do a little bit more work with this library. So then we introduce another one. And we double it with, over here, we double it with our original one. Sounds like this. Oh, it's over here. And under everything else, you have that. And you can see we also have these sort of very, very light sort of timpani hits here, just to impact those chord changes a little bit more than we had previously, since this is like our main forte. And this is exactly how the original piece was laid out. You sort of start incredibly, incredibly quiet, and then each pass you have of the whole entire progression, you increasingly build in dynamics and in overall sort of emotion. So that's what we have going on there. And then for each of our changes, when we go into another pass, we have these sort of subsonic booms sort of impacting those moments, just so we have a little bit more of like a puncturing statement. All right, so here's just another thing. So there were a few chords on in the phrase that I feel like could have a little bit more impact the second and third time around. So I introduced a little synthetic element. It's this patch from Omnisphere called Gold Wings. Has a very string sound to it, and then when you combine that with the flotando, it gives a little bit more impact to these chords. So that's all we really have going on there. So there is my arrangement of Sir Edward Elgar's Nimrod. You can see it's not incredibly complex. You don't need it to be incredibly complex because it is a piece that relies so heavily on the musical content alone, just the way for which he voices his chords and the way for which he uses these really, really beautiful inversions. And whenever a lot of the time I talk about the Elgarian way of voicing chords, and what I really mean is using tons and tons of inversions and waiting for the really right moment to use the strong root chords. You can see throughout this piece he's using a whole lot of these third in the bass, or in other words, first inversions of chords, just to add to the emotional richness when you do get to these main root chords. So this is one thing that Ben did that I absolutely adored, and it's these gigantic, huge suspensions using the horn. So you can see as we go from this E flat major chord, the horns stay on this G, you know? Which gives this insane suspension that just tugs at your heart. And this is happening in the movie as Tom Hardy's plane lands on the beach. And it's this incredible suspension. And so here's how that sounds here. So So there is my arrangement of Sir Edward Elgar's Nimrod. Hope that you guys enjoyed this little walkthrough, and I hope that you guys have a fantastic new year, and I look forward to seeing all of you in 2018. Cheers to you all, and I'll see you later.